So welcome everyone to the day 2 of our Women in AI Hackathon. I would like to thank the amazing organizing team that we have here, who has put a lot of efforts in the last many months to bring together this amazing hackathon. So it is building a platform for you all for advancing or entering your career in AI. Thank you to the team. We have an amazing speaker here today, Amber Roberts, who will be doing a workshop, the first workshop. And I'd like to give a quick introduction to Amber. Amber is an astronomer and a machine learning engineer. She comes to ARIS from Splunk ML product organization, where she built out the ML feature solutions as an ML product manager. Amber's current role as a community-oriented machine learning engineer looks to help teams across all industries build ML observability into productionalized AI environments. Amber, this is a very, very important topic that you are covering today, monitoring your models in production with ML observability. Thank you for being a speaker. Over to you for the session.
Thank you. And thank everyone who's has a co-host next to their name and has organized this amazing event. I've already met some fantastic women, and I'm really excited to kind of go through this presentation. So it will be kind of workshop format. I know there's only half an hour. I also like to prioritize getting folks' questions answered, having a discussion. It's always more fun, especially with a lot of us working from home. It's great to have that kind of back and forth. So first, I'm just curious, and everyone could just put in the chat, like, has anyone heard the term ML observability before? You can say yes or no. And if some of you have probably heard of different types of observability. Oh, awesome. That's great participation. All right. Mostly no's, a few yeses. Okay, that's great. So we're going to get into an intro into ML observability. But from the ladies I've talked to that are attending this event, what I see a lot of the time is that a lot of you are either data scientists, machine learning engineers, or you're looking to develop that area more fully. You're looking to expand your skills there, and you're looking for your next role in industry. So I've worked with a lot of folks from academia or folks from careers like software engineering and help them transition into roles such as machine learning engineer, data scientist, and getting that first role, getting that second role. And a key thing that I think you could take away from this talk, even if you don't manage your models in production, is being able to answer those types of interview questions when folks ask, is this model live? Or like if you have a project that you worked on independently and someone asks, like, how do you deploy this? Like, how do you make sure your model is operating well in production? How do you make sure your model's fair? How do you make sure that you're mitigating performance degradation, mitigating bias, mitigating drift? All these important things that once you build your model and your model is going to have an impact on customers, an impact on users, you want to make sure that it's doing as good of a job as possible. So that's really what we're focusing on today. So think about any questions you might have around those topics, and we'll get into the slides. I also posted some links. I'll repost the links and I'll go through exactly what I posted there. I'll just go into slideshow view. Looks like everyone can see my screen. And even if I can't see the chat, the wonderful co-hosts are going to keep me informed to your questions. So the links I dropped in, one was signing up to join our community Slack group. We have a really active community Slack group. I manage it. It's the most active ML observability Slack group, mostly because of the discussions we have and the constant events we are putting on. We're always putting on kind of panel discussions and workshops. So even though we're not going to get a super in-depth workshop today with the time crunch, note that there are a lot of workshops. They're around fraud models, they're around churn models, and they're around unstructured models. So every kind of model you can think of, we do have workshops for those. The other link is signing up for your free account. So you could sign up for your free account. We're going to go through kind of a fast version of the workshop so you can follow along with that. But the key thing is when you do sign up for your free account, you get access to it for as long as you want. So there's demo models in there. You can play around with them. You can put your own data into the platform. It's completely yours to access. And you'll have, like I said, you'll have access to it after the workshop ends as well. The other link is going to be for our free ML observability certification course. It takes about several hours to complete. And it's just a way to get everyone an intro to ML observability, especially those that haven't heard it. And you can post that certificate on your LinkedIn. And then I put my LinkedIn at the bottom in case you want to connect, in case you have more questions afterwards. All right, perfect. So the workshop today is about troubleshooting your models in production. And the reason why this is so difficult. So also in the chat, like who here has ever built a model? It could have been just a scikit-learn model, like you could have trained a deep neural network. It could be anything kind of related to building a model, whether that's in a Jupyter notebook or in an industry, type workflow. So if anyone's ever built that model, just put in the chat that like you've built a model before, so I can kind of see how many folks here have done that. And then I'm curious, like for the folks that have actually took a model from research to production. So like anyone here having to actually take a model from that research, from that Jupyter notebook phase and put it into production. I'd love to hear like your thoughts on that because it's incredibly difficult, mostly because we can build a model, we can run every experiment we can think of, but once we actually put that model into production, anything can happen. Once this model touches real world inferences, they can start to break, they can start to drift, you don't know who they're impacting, so a lot can really happen in that time. So that's where ML observability comes in. Arise has done a survey of over 1,000 companies that are leveraging ML. Majority of these folks were ML engineers that we surveyed, and 84% say that it takes at least a week to detect and fix an issue in production. And this is pretty painstaking. A lot of customers we have are coming to us because the reason they found out that they had an issue in production was because customers were calling and complaining that something was wrong. And that's really the last thing we want when we're thinking of building a model. So if you're like in an interview and someone's asking you like, what are the key things to think when you're building a model? It's normally not a question aimed at the data. It's normally aimed at that end goal. So who are these models touching? Like, who do they affect? What's the impact they're having? Because if it takes at least a week to even find an issue, let alone fix it, it's really messing up a lot of users. It's increasing churn. It's increasing customer dissatisfaction. So we want to make sure that we're mitigating those mistakes as fast as possible. And that's where a tool like Arise comes in. That's where ML observability comes in to make sure these models are constantly monitored and a level deeper of actually figuring out what's wrong in the first place. And so this was 84%. I think the next highest amount, like 12% or something, said it takes at least a month to find and fix an issue in production. A lot of that's due to very large models from very large teams not even being retrained more than once or twice a year. So just keeping an eye out for that. And when we say companies now, it's really every company is an AI company. We're seeing fast-paced startups, you're leveraging AI, and we're seeing companies that are well over 150 years old leveraging AI in production. So it could be used for a host of tasks from customer support to sales to kind of anything related to that demand forecasting. So being able to understand how to build a model and understand what it needs once it's built is incredibly important for these teams. And then we can think of how time has been divided up on ML in these last 5 years. So when we think of the biggest challenges that that teams are faced with when building these models, the reason that there's so many challenges around the production side is that on average, and this again comes from the survey, on average, less than 1% of MLE's time is spent monitoring in production. That's because we know so much goes into the data prep, to the model training, to the model development. You can see from this hackathon that, your model's only going to be as good as the data. So making sure that data is well curated, and that, of course, that's incredibly important, but really focusing on that time in production and the challenges. Because these main problems are around model and data drift, model interpretability, model degradation, data quality issues, fairness and bias issues, and then also model readiness. So what teams currently do a lot of the time, and like these are very large teams, they have a very sophisticated workflow for that machine learning pipeline because they're doing their data preparation, they're doing their model training, they're doing their model development. They have great tools for these. And then that last mile, they're trying to figure it out along the way. A lot of times, no two errors are the exact same. They don't know exactly what to be looking for, so they're just putting in what they can. Everyone's trying their best to make sure these models are doing what they should do in production. The problem is when you try to repurpose existing tools or try to come up with a solution when you don't really know the scope of the problem, it's not going to solve everything. So for that, really having a tool that kind of encompasses that last mile, which is ML observability. And I wanted to add a concrete definition to ML observability because there's network observability. Observability can be thrown into different parts of the tech stack. When we think of ML observability specifically, we think of it as the software that helps teams automatically monitor, understand where to fix it when it's broken, and improve data and models. And I wanted to just briefly touch on the difference between ML observability and ML monitoring. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. The key thing is ML monitoring is that first layer of ML observability. It's incredibly necessary and important to have monitoring in place, but ML observability is actually going to help with the root cause analysis aspect. So ML monitoring, like, yes, you'll get a red or green light on how your model is doing, but the observability helps you really go down, troubleshoot, and resolve those problems. Okay, so I also put the link in the chat. You can sign up for your free Arise account. We're going to get into kind of the workshop phase about halfway through. We're making good time. Does anyone have questions on what we've currently gone through? I don't think I could see the chat. So
yes, actually, you have 2 questions in the chat. I can read them if you don't see them.
Yes, I think why I'm sharing the screen for whatever reason, the chat's not popping up. If I go out of full screen. Oh, okay. I can see it now that I'm out of full screen. Yeah, we're all very good at tech, right? Yeah, we got it. Okay, so I see one question from, okay, is the ML observability course free? Yes, it's completely free. And you can also put that certification on your LinkedIn. So yeah, we made it for everyone just to get an intro. And it's also the first and only current ML observability course out there. More to come. Another question on what are the tools you have used so far? Which have you liked the most and why? So, well, tools for ML observability, I'm a little partial to Arise, but I mean, I joined Arise when I was really passionate about the tool, about the space. I think a lot of us have been kind of in that SQL query black hole, trying to figure out like what's wrong, or going like line by line, trying to figure out like what in my code is broken. And so just having something that surfaces up these insights, and I'll show you what that looks like, is incredibly useful. We also have the best ability to scale. So there's some of our I'll call them competitors, but like the space is a little bit different. The fact that we look at unstructured models is incredibly useful. Like we actually do the UMAP projections, we monitor embedding drift. So if your clusters are starting to drift, we can look at that. And we handle very high scale, so very high volume of inferences. So that's why we have our very large, well-known customers that handle a lot of that data. All right. I'm gonna see if
what is your so is there any specific cloud platform, or is there any specific tools that like that kind of dictates that you can only work with, let's say, like Data Robot or Google Cloud? So how generalized your tool is?
Right. I think I also deleted a slide in that process, but that's a great question. And I think it even goes to what someone had put in the chat on that there are a lot of tools like to deploy models, but people don't really talk about like after that step. So in terms of tooling, the nice thing about Arise is you only need the data. So the way it works is you send in your input data. So that could look like a Python SDK where you're sending in data frames that are your training, that are your production, that are your features. So any way that you get that data, so we work with Azure, we work with Google Cloud, we work with on-prem installs, because all we need is the data in, and then we're running our platform. So I would recommend some tools over another just for personal preferences and what I think works pretty smoothly. But for whatever teams do, like you have really old insurance companies and super new fast-paced startups, and the tool chain is completely different. So being able to say like you just need your inputs and outputs really simplifies it for a lot of teams. But there are some platforms that do ML observability that require the full model, that you like send in the full model and not just the inputs and outputs. That's a great point.
Thank
All
you.
right. Any other questions before we get in the walkthrough? Everyone should have been able to create their Arise account. You can also go to the arise.com site. It takes about a minute to sign up for the free account, and then you just get a confirmation email and can go right into it. Probably the first thing you'll see is this getting started with Arise. There's a bunch of additional workflows, like maybe you have specific problems with drift, like model drift, which is when what essentially you were expecting is no longer happening. There was a lot of drift during the pandemic with models, which means there wasn't like a sharp drop off, but your models slowly started changing over time. The key thing with drift, if you ever get the kind of interview question, like when do you need to monitor for drift, or when can you tell if your models start drifting? Drift is great for models that don't have fast actuals, so don't have ground truths. Some of you have probably worked with models like maybe you have a churn model, and you only get that churn data when it happens or at the end of the 60-day period if you're working with like a 60-day churn model. So in the meantime, you could start to see if there's any changes, if there's any preference changes, and then start seeing if that's related to performance degradation, because there's performance, there's drift, and then there's explainability. And explainability is a nice tool to have. Explainability is like your SHAP values. And a lot of folks think that they want, I'm just saying this now because you said there was like a responsible AI kind of talk going on. And I know responsible AI is kind of baked throughout this event. Some teams get confused when they say like, we want responsible AI, we want explainability, because explainability, things like SHAP values, they're nice in that they tell you what decisions what features most led to a certain decision, but it doesn't actually tell you anything on if that decision was correct, the impact that it made. So for that, you need more like performance metrics. So it's great seeing that like, oh, I rejected this loan because I see like, this is the person's bank, this is the person's income, this is the person's that, and you can see the ranking of those features. Like that's nice to see, but you don't know if that rejection, we don't know what happens after that prediction was made on that rejection. You don't know like any of the kind of response to it. And for that, we also have bias tracing, which is one of like the workflows through here, bias tracing. All right, I'm going to dive into one of the models, and we should be able to actually get through several of the topics that I mentioned. If I go into a fraud model, for example, just I'm gonna move some of the faces around here, make sure I can still see people. And so the first thing we think of when we're trying to understand how our model is doing is we want to think about performance. Performance is the easiest way to get feedback on a model. So in order to do that, I can look at performance tracing. And this is a really cool view. This is what folks spend a lot of time in Arise kind of playing around with. And it seems like a lot at first, but it's essentially a bird's eye view on hundreds of SQL queries, and you can see how things are moving together. So what I mean by that is if I'm looking at performance tracing, I can choose whatever metric I want as, this is my metric for success. I'm going to use false negative rate because this is a fraud model. So the higher the false negative rate, the more fraud is coming through. So we want to make sure the false negative rate is minimized. So we want it as low as possible. So here we're actually seeing an increase in false negative rate. And what I can do is kind of focus in on that area. I can see my false negative rate overall. I can see it if I decide to, maybe I want to like zoom in to like a certain area, and I could do that by either putting in a calendar time, zooming in through this, or I could just kind of highlight a selected area. As we see, the false negative rate did go up, and we can get a breakdown of the performance. So we have our performance insights. And so this is telling us the worst performing slices and inputs of data. So what's actually bringing down our performance the most? California is bringing down our performance a lot. Merchant ID is bringing it down a lot. And we find our worst performing slices based on our volume of data. So based on our volume of data, like what's really pulling down the overall performance. And we can look at feature importance, because feature performance is still nice to have. Feature importance is our SHAP values, that's our explainability. It is nice to triage by feature importance, because you can say, oh, this is a really important feature, and it's also bringing down performance a lot. But it's key to have worse performing slices because it's a function of volume. But the key takeaways are you're just trying to figure out like what's going on here. Like, why is this performing so poorly? And I can actually add comparisons. So like A/B test my model versions. So if you think of like A/B testing models, you can think of that, but like almost version control for your models. So I can have data set A, which is a production data set. I can look at like 2 different production windows. I can look at training and production, validation versus training, and different versions of each of that. So that's where teams get a lot of benefit. You can look at your model that's real time in production and compare it to a challenger model, for example, or just compare it to a different time when your model was performing better. So what we can do is we can look at production, compare it to our training data set. This might not have data for it because you actually only need your inferences. So I'm going to go to a time where the model looked a bit better, where the false negative rate was much lower, where the model was performing better, compare the two, and then I can get these breakdowns. So going into poorly performing feature, I can see that if this is a time when my model is performing well compared to a time when my model is performing poorly, I can compare those. I could get these side-by-side histograms, and I can see that when my model is performing really poorly in data set A, we see that there's a very high volume of this merchant that's bringing down my performance. And what we don't see is this data in the rest of my set. So likely I only trained my model on these merchants, and I haven't trained my model on the one that's causing all the issues. This makes a lot of sense. If we're training our model on, if we're training our model on certain data and that we expect to see, we can expect our model to make good decisions based on that. But if we don't have our model trained on certain data and then we expect it to make good predictions, it's going to start going a little haywire. So that's where we saw that bump. We can also go into any features. We could view the explainability. We can exclude these cohorts. So if I then exclude it, let's see how it changes. So our false negative rate improved, I think it was like 5 or 6%, just by filtering on that. So if you've used like SQL, if you've used Python, and you start like, let's say, we ignore this piece of data and then recalculate it, like then that data is causing the issue. You can do that for now very large volumes, easily change it out, see the differences, and make a lot of decisions for that. We can do the same thing with drift and fairness. So we have specific fairness metrics like parity scores that will tell us, are the decisions you're making, are the performance of those decisions having the same impact for certain filters. So you could filter on ethnicity, you could filter on gender, you can filter on nationality. So you can filter on these and see like, are the decisions actually affecting the performance? Is that performance being brought down? Am I being fair, or is my model exhibiting algorithmic bias? So that's what you can tell with the platform. And then you can also set up monitors on things like performance tracing, drift, data quality, to really make sure your models are performing optimally in production. I know that was a little fast. So I highly recommend joining the community Slack, where we do a lot more of these walkthroughs. Like any software, it takes a little bit of time to grok, but hopefully you're able to see the time saving component of just having this. And instead of like you going through, because a customer calls about an issue and you're going through each snippet of code trying to figure out what's wrong, you can just find this root cause, look at where in the data the issue is happening, and then make that correction. I know we're at 1 minute, but is there any questions I can answer in that time?
There's one in sorry. There is one in the chat, which I basically wanted to know. Is there any other open source tools available which does similar, like which we can use for ML observability to be added to the workflows?
Yes. So the free version of a Rise, you could put in like data up to a certain amount, but it's like once you hit enterprise stuff, it's not open source. And open source software is like Evidently, and which teams have used. We would not recommend something like Evidently, like if your model's making business critical decisions, like if you're making decisions on like profitability, if decisions like affect like individuals' lives, we recommend something that's more first compliant and that can handle scale, and something that's like more built for these important use cases. But if you're just playing around and experimenting, Evidently is an open source tool that can do some of what you've seen.
Thank you, Amber.
All right. Hopefully you learned a bit about ML observability. You can learn a lot more in the course. It's at your own pace. You can rewatch things, so it doesn't talk as fast as I do. But I hope you guys have a great time at the hackathon, and keep it up, ladies. You're killing it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amber, for your time. This presentation was so interesting, and I hope that I'm sure everyone has gotten something that they can use out of it. So we really appreciate your effort for joining us as a mentor and also as a speaker. So thank you again. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks,
So
everyone.
yeah. Thanks, Amber.
Bye.
Okay. So we have our next session. If everybody wants to stay on the line, we have Yukin. Yukin, just want to double check that you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. I think you can see my face here.
Yeah.
At least I'm seeing myself.
Thanks. Okay.
Okay.
I'm seeing so, thanks. Okay, so everybody want to welcome Yukin. Yukin is here to do our responsible AI session. I'll do just a really quick intro so you can get into it. Yukin holds a master's in statistics. She's worked in the field of data science for more than 10 years, and she loves to use her technical skills to solve business problems and influence through peer-reviewed publications and talks. At work, she advocates for ethical AI practices and aims to build better and safer AI products. She is also our Women in AI City Lead for Calgary, and she works to create a vibrant community to inspire and uplift each other. So thank you, Yukin, for joining us. Please welcome Yukin, and we will hand it over to you for our responsible AI session. Thank you.
Can everyone see my slides that I shared?
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm happy to be here and happy to hear part of Amber's presentation as well, because I really can't wait to try to use Arise as well, because I work in this area that I'm really looking at some tools that can check the explainability, the fairness, the data drift, data quality. That's a wonderful tool. So, but today's presentation from my part is one step back, that I'm focusing on the awareness of responsible AI and general information. That I think everyone, no matter you are coding or not coding, you have AI model or not having AI model, it will be a good information. I hope it's a good information for everyone, no matter your technical skill. So this is, let me see if I can flip it. Yeah, I can. Okay. So I will talk about what is responsible AI, because you hear people talk about it all the time. Almost everyone is talking about responsible AI and what does it mean and why it matters to us. And what can each of us do? That's more important. So when you search about responsible AI, it's one word, but it covers many different aspects. And the most frequently mentioned aspects are privacy, transparency, accountability, explainability, fairness. I'm going to give some examples on those aspects so you know more about what does it mean about responsible AI. And I remember, because I started to work in this area a little bit more than 5 years ago, when I searched responsible AI, it didn't even exist. And in this past 5 years, it's exploding that everyone is talking about it. And also, you talking about AI, it's also exploding. Before you notice, you are already living in an AI world. Like if you're Googling a product, you get the recommendations the next day or even next hour on your Facebook page or elsewhere, and you think it's creepy. How could they know what I'm looking for? Like now I'm trying to get a fridge, and then I get advertised from Maytag, from Brick, from Home Depot, from all those sources. And also when you watch a YouTube video, now I don't even look. I just, like when I play music for my kids, I just play it, and the next one will definitely be one of the songs that they like Five Little Monkey or something. So they know us, they know our habit, they know what you're looking for, and you don't even have to look for it, and they already predict what we want. So before you notice, it's everywhere. But however, according to a KPMG survey, the trust on AI system across many countries like US, Canada, UK, Germany, only about 30% of people are willing to rely on information provided by an AI system or share information with an AI system. And what's the reason? AI is everywhere, it's in our life, but we don't have trust on it. It's because these reasons. Just to summarize, if everyone take 5 minutes, think about around you, you may think of unfair applications, unfair, like if you are in a minority group, like if you're female, if you are people with color like me, that you may notice even more. And even if regardless of color and gender, you still see. The other day I found that through a third-party rental car that website, according to the different countries you are arriving from, you get different quote for the rental car. So we feel hurt if we are one of the people that pay more than other people from other countries for the same car, for the same checkout date, for the same city. We feel hurt because there's biased prediction. But that's just that we pay more. There will be other things like jail sentences, health treatment, that's even more important to us, that hurts people when there's unfair prediction. And also we feel we're not seen, like for hiring practices, the gender and other minority biases, and maybe it's as simple as Google Home. When I talk to Google Home, you can't imagine how bad it's picking up my accent. It can't recognize my accent, and I feel that I'm not seen. But maybe other people, like around, you're fluent in English, you're a native English speaker, and you don't see that. But I feel it doesn't see me. So those computers, there's lack of recognitions for people with disabilities, women, people of color, people with accent. And the other important piece is it can trace our information. I remember there were a time that I want to buy, what's that called? It's the genetic test that you buy a kit and then they can send some sample back and they can tell where did you come from and how, and all those genetic issues that you may have. And I saw a lot of people reply to them that I worry that if they use our genetic information, I worry that if they trace us, or even later they sell us something. If you through that testing, they see that you're prone to get diabetes, and then they may sell you something for that diabetes. And we all don't trust that anymore. We worry that our data will be traced, our data will be shared with whoever we don't know, and we get phone calls, we get emails and marketing emails and phone calls. That's what we don't want. And there's also complex terms of service agreements. I'm sure there will be many times, there have been many times that you get a service agreement and you just click I agree, because first you don't have time to read through it. Second, you don't know what's it about. So that's about the transparency of AI, because we have some understanding around AI. We work in this area. It doesn't mean that everyone in the world, in society, have the same understanding around AI. And people are even searching, will AI take over the world? Will AI take over all the jobs? Of course, that's a big concern. I mean, different people have different understanding around AI, and the agreements is so long and it's so confusing for a lot of people. And the other one is automated purchase through voice recognition system. I myself, as an example, when I talk to customer service, I don't like to chat with a bot, because first, I think it's taking me a longer time. It never understands what I need. I just want to talk to the agent directly rather than talking to the bot. And I also don't want to train the bot in the way that I send information, because those are interactive training that the bot is learning from you, and I don't want to provide false information, because my accent, maybe because the words I'm using is not right, and I'm training it in the wrong direction. So different ways, people all have different reasons of not using different products. So we see AI as definitely having positive impacts. Our life is so much easier with AI, but there are always fears around it. And many people think, well, it did happen, but it won't happen on me because I have the best intention. I won't ever create an AI that has bias in there. In my everyday life, I treat everyone the same. I'm not discriminated. Then I'm fine. But the truth is not. A lot of harms are unintentional harms because if you don't check the original data, you never see how much bias is already in there. And if you don't check the bias in the original data that you're using, you're building models and you're amplifying the bias without even knowing that. And we see a lot of examples around that. So that's one thing why we need to know about responsible AI, why I need to be aware of that, and why we need to take action. And we're not mentioning intentional biases. AI is so powerful. What if it's used by hackers and other people? Like, it's so easy for them to use. And there can be micro-targeting during election that we all know that happened in the US. So, and if we have those unintentional bias, intentional bias that we didn't realize, we didn't take action, soon it will shape the broader environment and society with those gaps. Like, for example, for those people like new immigrants who have very little credit history, they won't get financial support or lending, and then it will potentially increase the wealth gap. So there are many social impact from those unintended and intended bias. That's why you can see that there are so many examples, and that's just a little subset of the examples that you see. Just think around. You can notice a lot of biases that is already happening around us, and we are living with it. So now I'm giving a proper definition of responsible AI. It's the practice of designing, building, and deploying AI in a manner that empowers people and business and fairly impact customers and society. So if you read it, you can see the important pieces. It's in the practice of designing, building, and deploying. So if Amber's talk is more around building and deploying, what I'm talking about is more about designing. I believe that responsible AI should start very early. It actually lives in our everyday life. That's why I keep mentioning it's all around us. And we need responsible AI to increase the public trust, to accelerate positive business and societal impact. Of course, we want people to trust it. So when we're building some awesome tool, they will be willing to use it. They will not ask what's in there, why it's happening, what's the negative impact on us. Of course, there will be many more transparency that we need to provide to our users, but those are our goal, that we want to create great tool. We want people to trust them so they can use it. We don't want to create a great tool that no one wants to use it. And we also want to diminish the harms to people and planet caused by AI. Like I just mentioned that I feel harm. I feel I'm not seen. And I really want to do something. And actually, there are many companies that are already doing this. Even though they're doing it, there are still more harms generating at the same time. That's why I think awareness is the key. If you start from the beginning, have responsible AI in mind from designing, you can eliminating those new generations of harms. I have a very good example. I don't have a picture here. Google Translate. You see some examples that is from another language, and if you translate it into English, like if the original language is someone is a doctor, and when it's translated into English, you get he is a doctor rather than she is a doctor. And Google did something. If you do some similar search, you see that they have already done something. Like now, if someone is a doctor, they will have two translations. One is he is a doctor, one is she is a doctor. So it's already giving you options, and it's trying to eliminate those discriminations. So I see many people and organizations, they are taking actions. But then what does it mean to us, and what do we do to help? And this is what I want to talk about. That's more important than that. It's about you, everyone on the call, everyone around us, everyone that you share this information with. You are the key of eliminating biases, unfair, unresponsible AI in our world. And how do we do that? The planning is very important. So when you are going to create a product, you think about who is going to use it. Do they have the same understanding of AI as we do? Or what kind of information shall we pass on them so that they can trust our product better? Who can be harmed by our product? And you can document it. And when you do the planning, when you do the actual modeling, you are considering those, and that will shape differently of your developing and deploying. And education, I see that many courses are available right now that you can take to know more about responsible AI. And research and publications. The good thing is it's exploding and everyone is talking about it. So there are many use cases. For example, when you're building a fraud model, when you're building a churn model, you can always search what are the potential biases that it can exist in the churn model, or in a what was the example I just talked about? So anything you want to build, you can search for what are the potential biases, because a lot of times you don't know it could happen. Like the example I just gave, that I find Google Home is not recognizing my accent. But if you're not experiencing it, you just think you can't predict that could happen. So by searching for the researches and publications, that will be very helpful for you. And the last piece, which is the most important piece, is talk to people who will be impacted. Just because you cannot put yourself in their shoe without talking to them, it's important to know what they care about, what confused them, what worries them, and in which cases they feel they are not seen, and how do you avoid that happen in your product. So those are something that we can do during our designing of our tool. And so some questions to ask is, who can be harmed? And are minor groups considered? Like when you are creating a facial recognition tool, are you consider people with different colors, or people look very different, and how's the performance around that? So do a lot of testing. That I mentioned here is like Amber's tool. It's a good one for you to do some testing. And also, do users understand? I think that's an important piece, is like I said, their knowledge level would be very different. We are facing the whole society. We're not facing a small group of people. So how do we help them to understand our tool? How do we demystify our tool so they can trust our tool? And is there a possibility to roll back if something happened? And who takes accountability? I think those are all simple questions, but when you're actually applying for it, you will see the benefits of asking those questions. Like accountability piece. The other day, my son used his pencil and draw on my laptop case. And it's a MacBook, it's silver, and it's quite nice, and he was drawing all on the case of my laptop. And I saw it. He said, "You should blame the pencil." I said, "No, I should, it's your response. You are the one who used the pencil. Why do I blame the pencil?" And then later I realized this is such a silly, you think it's a silly thing that happened to a kid that blame other things. But just think about ourselves when we are using AI to build a tool. if something happened, do we blame the AI? Do we blame the tool, or it's our accountability? So I know it's a simple example, it's a silly thing that happened to kids, but sometimes it happens to us as well. So just think, when you're building tools, when you're a user, when you get the chance to communicate with the developer, you are the one holding the pencil. And I have a pencil just beside me. You are the one holding the pencil, and you are the one to decide what you want to build and how well you want to shape the society. So I think when you are building things, think you are the one holding the pencil, and it's not the pencil that you should blame for if there are problems. That's my presentation. And lastly, I want to thank ATB Financial that I work for. Is always putting responsible AI at the first place. We have principles that we all follow. We want to build products that our customers love and trust. And also Responsible AI Institute that we collaborate with, and they provide some of the contents that I just presented, not the pencil example. They are really good. They are a nonprofit focused on helping organizations and individuals build and use AI responsibly. So if you want to join as an individual member of Ray, you can connect. I have the link here. And the other is I, as the city lead of Calgary for Women in AI, I work very hard to uplift women in this area and really try to build a vibrant community that everyone can help each other. I put the last image here as help us support communities, because I think responsible AI is not a one-person job. It's not a one organization's job. It's everyone's, and everyone in the community that we help each other. We voice out. If you see that you feel that you're not seen, you let people know and you share it. It's helping, because a lot of people, it's unintentional that the developers has never considered that. And if you voice out, and they can hear you and you can be seen. So I think it's very important, and I appreciate all the support from ATB and Responsible AI and Women in AI as well. And if you have further questions, I'm always welcoming discussions, feedback. I'll pause here if, I see many things in the chat. Okay. Are there any questions?
I think there's a. I'm going. I'm just gonna put you on mute for a second. Oh, it won't let me. Okay. Perfect. I think there's a question from Francie asking, are there any tools that you recommend for automating the RAI in the pipelines?
That's a great question. I found for open sources, there's different tools for different areas, but there's no streamlined tool that we can use other than maybe paid version. So for instance, I don't have a good tool yet. I'm also looking for it. On the other hand, I think that's the latter piece of building models. It's like Amber just mentioned, testing, monitoring, and ML observability. But I think what's equally important is at the designing phase, is the mindset, is the awareness, is how people talk about it, how people take it seriously at everyday life.
I think that's a really good point, Yukin, about RAI, especially given just a little bit of a shout out to our judging criteria. One of the criteria does revolve around responsible AI. So Yukin, I'm wondering if you have any advice for the participants on the call in terms of, there is a short amount of time that we have in order to create a full-blown solution or an idea of a solution or product or whatever the participants choose. But do you have any advice around how to think about RAI in terms of this competition?
I think you can start from those key aspects that I mentioned about fairness, transparency. I think transparency is one of the easier one. Is how do you design your tool? How do you design it so your customers understand it? For example, because I'm from a financial institute, so I care more about that. When I'm using my online portal of those online banking, sometimes the offers pop up, and there are always two options: remind me later or tell me more. A lot of times I do want to know more, but right now I don't have time to know more. I want to click remind me later, but then when it will remind me again, I don't know. So I think from a designer's perspective, I would want to put remind me next time when I log in, or remind me in 1 week, or call me at certain time. So that way I am interested in the product. From the bank perspective, they do want to get this customer. But then now I really want it, but I don't have time right now. I think they could design it better, that they tell me when they are going to remind me again, or they give me a way to tell them when I'm available to know more. So this is an example of transparency, is how do you develop your product so you are building ways to communicate with your users. Not just you are giving them the tool. Now you use it. And then you say, oh, I really want to get a customer. But then how? You're not giving them a channel to let you know that they do need this product. So that's one thing, is how do you talk to your customers? And the other thing I think is very helpful is do some research on that. Just a little bit Google about what can be the unfair cases for this use case. And then how do you solve it in your example? Those are some hopefully helpful advice for the participants.
No, that sounds great. You can. Thank you for that helpful advice.
And I also think even if you just think about a tiny little bit, just that you have responsible AI in mind is better than nothing. So you don't have to stress about it, because if you think about testing, it can be very complicated. I'm creating governance process for our company, and most of the time the feedback is too time consuming. And how do we have different rigors for different levels of risks? And I absolutely agree with that. We don't want to spend, for example, a week developing the model and 2 weeks talking about responsible AI. But we do want to have responsible AI in every step of model building. So it's not an afterthought. It's not an additional work and extra work. You are thinking about it. You are putting yourself in there. If you are holding the pencil, if you are one of the users, is that responsible enough to the users and the society? Okay, I think we're at time. I'll pass it back to Women in AI then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Yuken, and we really appreciate your support with Women in AI and also this hackathon. And I cannot reiterate how important responsible AI is to us in this hackathon. So I hope that the team here has been able to get some useful information to help them throughout this designing process for the hackathon. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this session.